I think of the life of a miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.
You're very welcome once again to the Leydon Mining Experience, where we are continuing on with our series of interviews with men who would have worked in the Leydon mines over the years. Well, I'm delighted to welcome this evening Dermot Leydon. Dermot, you're very welcome. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Great to have you on board. First of all, let's start off maybe with your early memories of mining. And you would have worked in Flynn's mines.
Flynn's mines, Gubberudda, which is, we're talking of the mining experience here. It's on up the road, and you had a sort of string of mines from Dermot here, and then you had Rover. And my grandfather, Henry Joe, he worked at McDermott's pit, and that actually had a locomotive that went around there, and we still have Whistle Hill named after the locomotive there. And I worked on up further was Gubberudda, and we'd noticed Flynn's pit. And I always think about a statement that came out of here, you know, that the workers always called it the pit, the owners called it the mine. You know, and that was kind of a thing. And I'd never say, oh, I was all day in the mine. You know, I was up at the pit.
You could probably sense maybe the different descriptions for the same place. Probably pit sounded as if you were down in the pits, where maybe mines had a little bit of a better ring to it.
It had. It was more sort of industrial, looked better on paper. You know, it's funny when you were on about the early memories of mining. I have a lovely memory which ties in with the Miners' Way walk here, that you're familiar with where I'm from in Cross Hill. And you have Cross Hill Road, and lower to that you have Malone. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you want to go from the cottages, we'll say up on Cross Hill, down onto Malone and on to Drumshambo in that direction, you could shortcut through our land. It took nearly a mile out of your walk, whereas the other way you had to go down Cross Hill into Origna and come back then and sort of dogleg back. So there was always a path through our land, and there was a spring well at the bottom part and a stile and a path up to that. And on the other hand, there was a stile coming in off Cross Hill. And the lovely thing about it was that you didn't realise when you grew up in a country community that you're part of all that. And you just knew your neighbours and chatted. And what you'd have when we'd be, as we'd say, putting up the hay, the lads that would be miners and neighbours, but a lot of them worked in the mines, would be heading away early, especially on a Saturday, to head down to McCrann's pub or maybe further afield, probably end up in the Mayflower for a dance. But we'd be putting up hay, and I'd be sent over as a young fella for a bucket of water, spring well water, and the lads would come down, they'd take off the clean shirt and hang it on a bush and start putting up the hay with you. And so my early memory, like of the mining men, was there in the hayfield, and that was what the Miners' Way is set up on, is these shortcuts and pathways that the miners used, you know, to and from the mines here.
So these guys would be coming out of the coal mines or the pits, and on their way down to shorten the road, they would take a walk down through the fields, the meadow fields, where you would be safe in the hay. And despite having walked today and maybe being thirsty, maybe suffering a little bit of dehydration, and maybe longing for a 7-Up or two, they'll still take time to make sure that they give you a hand to put up the hay, especially if there's maybe any forecast of rain.
That's right. They reckoned a rain on the way was another man in the field. It was as good as having an extra hand. The speed went up. And like that camaraderie, we'd sit down when the hay had been roped, and then the bottle of beer would come out from the house. Like, there'd be no beer until there was something to show for it. And that was lovely to sit down. I'm talking about neighbours. Like, I remember the Tivnans now, Tommy and his sons, you know, and there'd be great stories and yardens. And my grandfather, Henry Joe, and Dad were alive at the time, and that was just a lovely feeling, of community. So it meant that when I ended up working in the mines. You were working with kind of friends and neighbours, as well as to be people that would be from further afield. But
wasn't there a great social setting, say, in the Meadowfields that time? Because you're after triggering a memory now. One of the memories I would have when hay like that would be saved, or at least put into reeks or hayricks, as you used to call it, or even into the stacks or cocks of hay, that it used to make a great football field after that, because all the hay and everything was lifted off it, and you had, the narrowly cut grass, and it got you where you had Crow Park all of a sudden, where there was maybe a lot of rushes and a big meadow before that.
Before that, you couldn't move. There wasn't actually an openness that came to a farm when you had the meadows cleared. That was a lovely time of year and good weather. And just thinking too, the odd time our cattle used to break in and there'd be a game of rugby where they'd be tackling the hay. And that you think animals, there's devilment in them too. There was times that poked the things just for the for the sake of it.
Absolutely, they knew exactly where to go.
Oh, that's for sure. One man he was supposed to have come over and said, we didn't kind of know if our cattle were in his grass or his grass was in our cattle.
The lines got a bit blurred.
The lines are a bit blurred there.
Tell me the decision then for you to decide that you were going to work in the mines, because we'll talk about some of the other careers that you had in a couple of minutes, but you won't mind me saying it, you had a number of other talents as well. You were hugely successful DJ, a music radio broadcaster as well. A lot of people of my generation growing up, this was absolutely brilliant at the time to hear a guy who just lived down the road, originally from down the road, and here he was on local radio, and then you go to a disco, a local hall or whatever, there you were doing the disco. So you were combining the work on, say, with the discos, maybe a little bit of, dare I say, pirate radio at the time, and you were working in the coal mines. These worlds must have been polar opposite, Dermot, were they?
Yeah, it's funny, but if we go back into the history of mining here, it goes back to the 1500s, that there was an awful lot of men worked in the mines, never considered themselves miners. And you had a happy coincidence, if you look at, we're talking in November here, coming into December, and on the land, you couldn't work the weather, the short day. But there was the coincidence that there was a big demand for coal. And the coal, up until the Second World War was for the fireplace. And it was lump coal. And it's funny, there's thousands of tons of loose coal, slack as we'd say, and down to pebble size, in the mines that was never taken out. Mm-hmm. There was no market for it. But that's why, and I'll get to a man that I started working with, Mickey Rinn, very associated with here. And he always said, that the miner kept the farm, but the farm never kept a miner, So it was always back in the day, a man had a farm of land and he got cash in, very important this time of the year. He'd work in the mines for a while and for the winter, and then be back on the farm. And they didn't like, even being called a miner. It was a farmer who happened to mine. Mm-hmm. And I got into the mines purely by chance. Now, what happened was there was an epidemic of shingles and bad flu at the time, and there was an awful lot of men off work at Flynn's pit. And I was 18 at the time and doing up a motorbike for myself. And the brother Terry was very ill with shingles and was in the bed, not fit to get out of the bed. And he was married at the time, just married, and had a house in Drumshambo. And I was there during the day to keep an eye on him. He was quite low. And of course, being a teenager, there was always other stuff going on, Yeah. So I got this old banger of a motorbike and I was working on it. I had Mordens beside me there, the motorbike shop, to get parts. And so Mick Flynn, owner of Flynn and Lehenny Mines, he was in to see how Terry was doing, and we got paid by the fortnight, so he probably had a few pound in wages. And I got chatting with Mick, and I just said to him, I had the motorbike out on the street. I was after doing the final kind of tighten up, and this thing hadn't ran in a long time. And I was telling Mick, Well, you have a cup of tea and go and washing the paws, as we say, and I'll tackle into the second half after tea. And Mick had a sandwich box with him. Said, Jenny, an old cup of tea would be lovely with the sandwiches.
Yeah, the lunchbox with him, yeah.
The lunchbox with him. And so we got chatting, and we were chatting about farming and all the rest. And we came out, and he was interested in this bike to see would it start. And we ended up working on the points of it. And it was Mick that started it and took this bike around the block, right, for a spin. Big smile on his face, you know, he loved motorbikes and that sort of stuff. And he just said to me, now that you have transport, would there be any chance you come out to me in the morning? I've no man here. And I said,
so that was your entrance
that
exam.
that was my, you know what I mean, qualifications and entrance exam.
But he spotted the potential, and in fairness, he was looking for somebody, as the saying would go around here, that was handy.
That's it, and that's all I was handy.
Yeah.
Because I said to Mick, you know, there was a quote out of a fella, I know more, like a dog would know more about an aeroplane than I knew about mining.
Yeah.
You know, I knew nothing.
Right.
But like that, so I ended up, and Mick kind of, the induction was kind of come up and show you around the pit. And sure, there was a machine, a coal cutting machine broken. And the problem was with no maintenance men, no key men, there was 2 coal cutting machines, but now they were down to 1, and that one was given trouble. So it was a flap. I was out early, and sure, before I knew it, I was in right at the coal face, taking the plate off a coal cutting machine to get working on it.
So you were in very much with kind of a maintenance view in mind. And did that always remain the case, Dermot? Was that or did you end up doing drawing or cutting coal, or had you different jobs in the mines? Or?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like, as you can see, I was temporary, and when the proper workforce came back, I expected I'd be, as they'd say, going down the road. Yeah. But, you know, and now I do go off in tangents, but a tangent of that was, as I was saying, mining was always temporary, high risk, temporary. And it happened to go on a long time. So we see this legacy now, but it was always short-term, high risk, with not looking very far down into the future. And as I said, men that were there that were part-time, they used to say that the mines was sort of your waiting room to get enough money together for England. And England could be a waiting room to get enough money together for further afield, like America or Australia or New Zealand, somewhere like that. So it
was short-term in the sense that fellas were going to try and go and, well, I won't say better themselves, but look at alternative careers.
Yeah.
Or was there a fear that it was short-term, that even long before it closed in 1990, that there would have been maybe concerns about its viability long-term? Had you always that concern?
Oh, absolutely. And again, a little bit of a tangent, but you'll see where I'm going here. As a youngster going to the Tech in Drumshanbo, I got a bit of work on a survey over on, as we'll say, the Fairmount and Slieve and Earden. So we're here on the Rigna Mountains, Loch Allen and then Slieve and Earden. But Slieve and Earden consists of a few different sort of mountains as well. And there's a huge coal field in Bincroy. And that's where Wynn's mines were, Bincroy, Cashel. And you had Wynn's coal mine there in that coal field. And in that, there's an area near Ballinadlera, Bale Biog. And it's another part, kind of the left side of the mountain. And I surveyed that with view of the new power station coming into Arigna that was going to burn the crow coal from Bincroy, Bale Biog. And I seen the plans of the new station. And so the thing was that, the plan was that in 1979, it was going to commence, the start would be made on the crow coal station, with the view that by 84, the station would be fully commissioned, fully operational. And it was a massive 45 megawatt station compared to the 15 that was in we'll say station number 1. But we were surveying for a massive pylon that would be part of a rope system that carried containers of coal, like a cable car system, across the lake. To the new.
And this was a school project, was it?
I was actually, no, on this I was helping out. But I had learned about surveying funny, from Michael McGuinness was our
a
teacher.
science teacher in Drumshanbo.
Yeah, and he brought us out and we surveyed the field there. So I knew how it operated. And so when they were looking for leg work, so all I was doing was carrying the staff that has a prism in the top of it, and the laser would be reflected back and give the distance. And it was really exciting because we were on nearly a treasure hunt, because you have benchmarks. And these were markers put down during the Ordnance Survey of Ireland. And each one has a number and a shape on it like a crow's foot. So this crow's foot was what you were looking for. You found a benchmark, and when you had one, you had a reference to the next one. But they were put down like decades before. So you'd have to clear away the moss and all the stuff that was hiding, where they'd either use a milestone or where there was a big outcrop of rock, permanent rock, that mark it into it. And so what I seen was, at that time, the architect's plans for the new power station. And we were kind of getting the measurements for the blueprint that the builders and construction people would use, when they came in, the actual plan. So I seen it that the power station should have started in 79. And I remember asking around 1980, what's happened here? Where did all that surveying work and all that? And they said, the ESB aren't interested really. They're kicking it down the road. And we had an election in 1982 called the Crocole election here. And it was about, where's our station? And there was a big meeting in Drumshanbo, and there was a letter from Charlie Haughey saying that this station is opening up. There'll be a Crocole.
If he was returned to government.
If he was returned to government. And funny, one man mentioned how there was going to be a 200 milliwatt station there. And that's what we got. You get 200 milliwatts if you put a needle into an orange.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not 45 megawatts.
And just remind me of those elections, because there were so many of them at the time. Were Fianna Fáil returned that time? There was a lot of turbulence.
Yes,
yeah.
There was a lot of turbulence. It was only short term, because we'd had two elections.
Yeah.
We had sort of the proper election after a long-term government, and then it all started election after election, where you had coalitions and there was breakdowns.
And you had prominent Fianna Fáil people here at the time, in Sean Doherty and Cootehill. Terry Leydon was another Roscommon-based TD at that stage as well. And you would imagine with that political power, but just couldn't sway the ESB.
No, the ESB, you see, it's one of these things there that in the background, you had the Shannon Estuary. And the coal burning was seen. Why they were looking at a Crocole station in Rigna was Turbot station down there on the Shannon. It was burning heavy oil, and we had gone through the Middle East crisis and oil scarcities, and there was a story of a fella where there was a queue for petrol, and this fella was shaking his head at everyone that was queued up. And one fella rolled down the window and said, "What's the story here with the petrol?" He says, can you tell me how many F's there is in petrol? And he said, "There's no F in petrol." And he says, "Now you have it."
and they got their answer. So you
So
were
there was
very
no
much
oil.
seeing by, say, early 1980s, mid-1980s, that there was no sign of this new power station coming along, and that the future of the mines here was going to be a little bit bleak. Was it at that stage, or maybe had you done it beforehand, as Seamus Moore had in the line of the song about the transit van, where Margaret Thatcher told them to diversify a little bit and show a bit of initiative? At that stage, were you using initiative and diversifying?
Definitely. So we had an awful close call for the close down in 1984, because Money Point, which was burning now up and burning, or it opened in 85, but it was under construction, and the commitment to Money Point and burning imported coal, mostly from America, that was there. And I had seen the plan for the Crocole station here was to be up and running by 84 and close down number one, and that meant a closure basically to underground mining, because the new system was mostly going to be open cast. And it was only the fact that Dick Spring was propping up Fine Gael in power at that time, and the labour influence was strong enough to get a reprieve for the mining and continue on until
Because if we went to
89.
that open casting model in 84, how would that have represented, say, jobs and labour compared to underground mining?
There was no comparison. It was a fraction because, underground mining, even there's reports from people who were on about it's famine times here, that it was a great way of employing an awful lot of people for very small wages. And so the problem was that the wage pressure, inflation was running wild. We know that experience now. And so the wages were going up and up. The cost of mining was getting very high, but the actual price per tonne was staying pretty stationary, that the actual mine owners were getting,
Where initially people were employed in the mines, it was almost a cost-effective way of bringing people off the live register.
Yeah, exactly. And then the Rigna station opened burning coal because in the 50s, immigration out of all over Ireland, but here in particular, was massive. And again, it was in a way of bringing in employment to the area and trying to stem the flow of immigration. I mean, where we are here, you can look most directions at forestry. And in those forestries are family houses that the people left, worked a bit in the mines, went to England, went to America, and they never came back. This told the auctioneer to sell the land on, and the forestry provided. Yeah, and that was good money. So the station in Arigna was a sort of as much a political, stopgap thing as anything else. But that's right, I seen this so on the side of when I worked in the mines. I came in as a temporary worker. So to me it was a temporary thing, but the money was brilliant. And I was trying to get a mobile disco on the road. And that, it's hard for people to understand how scarce and expensive and specialised disco equipment was, especially when you're over here in the west of Ireland. So that was a great way of getting transport together and, getting money together to buy the equipment. But I was very lucky that I worked in an awful lot of aspects of the mine that I would have been working. I never now worked as a drawer, or a shoveler right on the coalface. But I'd have been involved with all the other jobs, to be a rakesman which you never considered at the time that there was a light railway system in the mines. Underground, you had a railway system that was constantly changing and evolving.
That's where the hutches were drawn
That's
out
where the
before.
hutches were. So your carriage, as we'd call a hutch, that was manpower. And then to get it out to the main road of the mine where you had a continuous rope that would bring trains of coal out, these hutches. In between, we had haulage engines. And these were known as hawsers, really. They were adapted from the ships, the marine side of thing, because you had a steel cable on a drum, basically, a motor one side and a gearbox the other, and a clutch. And so you could, depending on whether the haulage engine in some of the mines at the top of a slope, she'd let down the full ones and and haul in the empties, or vice versa if you were the other side. So I'd work on that. I might be out on the hill, as we'd say. And it's funny here, an image that I only seen recently of the mine at Gubberudda, the first mine that I worked in. There are no sheds or anything there, just the remains of the bunkers and the beam of the weighing scales. And that was such an important part that we overlook about the mines, that was what it was all about. That weighing scale was the centre of the whole operation, because you were bringing out coal and weighing it there. Mm-hmm. And then that was going into a lorry and off to be crushed and then go to the power station. But those weights, that's what the men were paid by. And I worked on the bridge now and again where your duty was, you stood behind the weighing scales and a hutch of coal came in, and you had a kind of a counterbalance on the beam of the scales, right, that went up and down. And the idea was that the weight of the hutch brought up the beam, And then you brought out a counterweight that kept bringing it down until it just rested on the beam that was just in balance. And that was marked in gradients of hundredweights and pounds. And there was the weight of your hutch minus an agreed weight, which is around 300 weight, was agreed as being the subtraction.
Was it a little bit of a complicated way from having walked on weighbridges now in quarries many years later, where there would have been what known as a tear weight, an empty weight of the larry, and then when the load was on it, you subtracted one from the other and you got the payload. But that
it was complicated. Yeah, because you had different shovelers and places, and there was different rates at times for different men, because when you started off in a branch, it was easy, a short draw. Whereas when that was nearing its end, bigger draw, longer draw, and harder, more difficult. So there could be wet coal and dry coal, and each set of the men worked in pairs, your shoveler and your drawer, and they had a pin, they called it, a loop of twine with a marker, maybe like a Guinness bottle top and different colour, maybe cloth, and they put that pin, as they called it, a marker on the handle of the hutch, and that came out. And then when I weighed that, you took the pin off and you had a nail there that you hung that pin on, and then you had a sheet with all the places and the drawers, and you marked in their weight into the sheet for each individual hutch. And so they'd come out at the end of the day and tally up their weight and their number of hutches and count their pins, make sure it tallied with their hutches, back in their pocket ready for the next day's work. So that's why you had to have.
Have there any disagreements? Any query?
Look, I wouldn't
you were
even
effectively the paymaster.
I wouldn't even go there. Like that was understood. Do you know what I mean? Like that's now like asking a referee, like you know, what sort of day had you? Yeah, you took that and you knew that was the case. And actually, you know, talking about things, we had one day these journalists, and I'd say this was the furthest west of the Shannon they ever were.
Yes.
And they were in looking at the mines, and they would be sent to us because at this time I'm talking about, we had a big landslide and it swept away virtually all of the outbuildings, and part of that was the continuous rope, the back balance and motor and everything. We hadn't it in place. And so it was easy to walk into our mine. You didn't have the cable and all that in your way. And I brought them in to where the lads were pushing out the hutches from what we'd say the first plate. And the operation was very close anyway to the entrance of the mine. So I was showing them this anyway, and it was great for them to see, you know, the coal being pushed out. And anyway, I was coming back out, and an awful lot of the lads I knew had piled up. They didn't want to meet them. Yeah. But two braver men anyway came out, and I wouldn't, you know, growing up and working with men, I never would take any heed of the condition of a miner coming out. But like they were like, you know, men that escaped from an explosion there, black and in rags, you know, and that you were wearing your roughest clothes to the mine. And even the old Wellington boots, they'd be working, if you were working in the dry area of the mine, if the old Wellingtons were a bit ripped, they were kind of ventilated and light, and the more worn they were, the lighter they were for working in. And the same, you know, with the old clothes would be patched up. And I was just thinking, you know, if you want to know what a drawer, what his work was like, imagine taking a full shopping trolley and running a marathon every day. That's what it's like in terms. And you know, when you were after physical activity, that you're, you know, drawn and tired, and you know, when you be sweating, the coal dust sticks to you, so you'd be black, haggard, and tired. And these men, they worked so hard they could burn off calories. Didn't matter what they were taking. It was kind of a lack of calories was nearly the problem, and that's why going down and having a few pints of porter, you know, and a good dinner, that just was burdened off. There was
still going to be a calorie.
Yeah. So these men looked like, you know, bedraggled.
Oh, absolutely.
But just to finish that story, these journalists were there, and they seen them in, and they'd be coming out. Actually, you get paid nothing here, you know. And I remember that day I had an old van with me. that I had for parts, and you never brought the good car, to the pit. So these lads were coming out in tattered clothes and getting into an absolute wreck of a car, and they were shaking their heads. We knew it was bad, but we didn't think it was this. And they never seen like that the wealth that was there on display of a Sunday at Mass, where and there was just a social aspect to that, that seeing social changes, that was the beginning actually of the family car, where probably in the courtship she'd have been out and he'd have taught her how to drive, and it was a great excuse to get out of a Sunday, and then she'd have the car for the usual, for the runs and stuff, so to school and the shop and what have you, and a lot of women would be working part-time as well. So that meant that the good car was left at home, and you brought any old thing to the pits, and that was a social change that we've seen so much of that. Another thing just was the siding, as we refer to it, like the briquette factory where Rigna Fuels are now. That I remember a stage where you had the carmen, as they've been known as the cartmen, carrying a neighbour of mine that when I moved and lived in Boyle, Joe Daly, for instance, he used to bring stuff down from Camden's and from the shops in Boyle with the draft horse and cart down to Arigna, and then get a fill of coal at the siding and back up to Boyle, and have his customers for that. So the sight of seeing a line of tractors mixed in, the new tractor was there, along with the horse and cart and the donkey and cart.
It was almost representing the change in one era into another.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.